Hello, everybody. Welcome back to English Champion. On this episode, we're going to include a third installment of the Harvard grading problem. I covered two parts of that last week. We went over the grading report fairly thoroughly itself. And then on the second episode, I covered some student reactions and a little bit of faculty input about grading as well. On this episode, I'm going to get a bit more specific. And instead of looking at Harvard as a whole, I'm going to focus on something that happens to be my expertise, which is Harvard's writing program. And what I'm going to share with you is the rubric, supposedly, that many classes at Harvard use to assess writing. And that's one of the things I did as an English professor, English department chair for many, many years is not only grade student writing. I argue that I graded more pages of student writing than any professor in the country. I will put my numbers up against anybody. But also, as a department chair, I was in charge of making sure all of the English courses, and then in many cases, the rest of the university, were following the proper procedures for grading writing. So it didn't matter what English course it was, we wanted to use the same rubric. I encouraged other departments and other classes to use my rubric so that there was some uniformity across campus, so that everyone was learning the same way, and we all had that same high expectations. What I'm going to share with you here is Harvard's rubric, and as you'll see, the expectations at Harvard are actually not very high. And that's kind of astounding. You'd think, well, Harvard, it's the best. These are the best students, and in this case, the best writers in the country. So the rubric for grading student writing when they turn in their papers in whatever class they're taking should be pretty rigorous. And yet it's not. It's kind of amazing. My rubric that I used for college classes for many, many, many years is way harder than the one at Harvard. So I want to share it with you, see what you think about it. It goes grade by grade, and there's a little bit of a breakdown for each level. And some are decent, but as it gets lower and lower, it gets worse and worse. So I want to share that with you here, and then I'll give you an opportunity to see my rubric later on. So this is Harvard College Writing Program Grading Rubric. I'm unclear if other departments use this or if this is only used in composition classes or what, but even if it's just composition classes, this is kind of astounding. So the first thing that it says is actually very good. Grades are based on the overall quality of the work submitted, not on the effort or time spent on the work or on the amount the essay has improved between draft and revision. So that's a key thing, and that's very positive because too many times students say, oh, but I worked so hard on this, I deserve a certain grade. And that is the incorrect thing we should be focusing on as teachers. What we should say as teachers is, I don't really care how long it took you to do this. I care how good it turned out. Because that's what the world cares about. The world doesn't care how long it took you to do whatever project you're working on. They care if the end result is a good one. It's like if you have two chefs, and one chef takes 2 hours to make this meal, and the other chef takes 20 minutes. And you put the plates in front of an eater, and the eater goes, yeah, the one that made it in only 20 minutes, that food is way better. That one that took 2 hours, this food is garbage. I'm not eating that. Well, the other chef could go, well, but I worked so hard on it. You should like my food. It's like, no, that food tastes better. That's the right answer. I don't care how long it took. This is what I like, or this is the best version. So it's the same thing in anything, whether you're building a house or implementing a marketing plan for a company, like whatever it is you're creating, the effort and the time it took doesn't matter. It matters how good is it? What's the result? How did it turn out? Is it good? Great. That's what I want. Is it bad? Get rid of it. I don't want it. There is no grading of effort. It's, can you do the job or not? That's what the real world's like, and so that's what it should be in a classroom. And at least at the top of the page here, that's what it says it's doing. But it's hard to see if they're actually sticking to that very well. But at least as far as just grading the result, they're on the right track so far. Okay, so this is what they deem to be an A paper. It means that the essay is excellent in all the criteria of the assignment. Doesn't mean it's perfect. And it's complete, has a fully realized beginning, middle, and end. Okay, good enough. We do want to be aiming at pretty darn near perfect, though it's right. Not all papers aren't going to be exactly perfect. So what does it have to do? Well, address the question that it raises. Yes. A paper like this would skillfully express an argumentative thesis. Yes. Provides a context for its own complex thesis. Yes. Grapples with interesting, complex ideas in the source or sources. Yes. Insightfully analyzes well-chosen evidence. Good. Develops its argument with a clear and logical structure. Yep. pays attention to alternate interpretations or points of view. Yep, you got to listen to the other side at least a little bit. Acknowledges and cites sources appropriately. Yep, and uses with precision the language and stylistic conventions that have been discussed in class. So this would be the grammar and structure that is appropriate for this assignment and this level. So yeah, I would agree. This is what an A paper should look like. It's a blending of argument, structure, and at the end there, a little bit of grammar. So I would agree. This is what A projects should look like. Fair enough. I don't have a problem yet. Let's keep going. A grade of A minus means that an essay accomplishes many of the things that an A-level essay would, but possesses one or two minor areas that could be improved. For example, the essay might contain one or two of the following features. It might convey stakes that are a little underdeveloped. There's a little grammar error there, or not fully related to the thesis. Okay, that depends. A little underdeveloped. Depends on how much that is, or not fully related to the thesis. If something's not fully related to the thesis in my classes, that is probably not going to receive any grade A minus or higher. That is automatically going to drop you down to a B. Everything has to be related to your thesis. So it kind of depends on the extent that it's drifting a bit, but this already is probably getting a little easier than my classes. It contains a thesis that uses a key term imprecisely. Well, that is a big problem, because if the whole essay is based on identifying certain key terms, then if it uses it imprecisely, then the whole essay is probably off. Well, in my classes, again, that would not be an A minus paper. There could be some wiggle room for how egregious this imprecise term is, or the imprecision of its use. But again, this is probably too generous for my classes, still getting it an A minus. Contains a claim with insufficient evidence, or offers a moment of evidence that is not fully analyzed. Insufficient evidence, again, depends on what insufficient means. But if you asked for evidence to support, whatever the argument is that the student's making, and it's not doing that, that's a big problem. In my classes, that can't still be an A minus or above. Contains an occasional moment of repetition, digression, or confusing order. That one might be okay. Again, sometimes students don't realize they're repeating a little bit, and if it's not too egregious, might be okay. You can dock them a little bit. Maybe if everything else is perfect, maybe still squeak out an A minus. That might be okay. Insufficiently addresses counter argument. Okay, well, if part of the assignment is you have to discuss the other side of this issue, and it does that insufficiently, then this automatically should drop you down to, at best, a B. So already, the A level was fine. The A minus level doesn't address anything with grammar. That's a problem, or conventions and mechanics. And it has several things that I would consider to be dangerously close to drifting us towards a B or even lower, not an A minus. So already there's some problems showing up here. Let's go a level further, down to a B plus. All right, a B plus for them means the essay might have a weakness in one area or a couple of weaknesses in less significant areas. For example, it depends on what less significant means. In my classes, everything is significant. I don't say, well, let's focus on this, but this stuff doesn't matter. In my class, everything matters. The thesis is arguable but not complex. Well, if the assignment wanted a challenging, interesting, unique type of argumentative thesis, and it's not, well, again, a B plus is a pretty high score. And if getting the thesis wrong is any indication of the quality of the paper, that's a big problem. The essay is otherwise very strong, but does not engage in counterargument. Again, if that's part of the assignment, which most of my assignments explicitly say, you need to have evidence and an argument from opposing sides. In fact, I even tell them where to put it in the essay so I can easily spot it. And if it doesn't have it, it says does not engage. Well, if that's completely absent, that's not even close to a B plus paper in my class. We're drifting down to C or even D level, or could be a failing grade if that was explicitly described in the assignment. The essay presents some uneven work with evidence. Again, if it's not using the evidence, doesn't know how to cite things properly. Some of the evidence it presents is weak, as it says in the next line. That's not a B plus paper. That's probably not even a B paper. We're drifting down to C and D or even failing levels here. The essay moves beyond a 5-paragraph structure, but sometimes proceeds by example rather than by developing claims. Depends on what your rules are about structure in your class. Sounds like at Harvard they really try to go past the 5-paragraph structure. That's totally fine. For writers who are more inexperienced, sticking with the 5-paragraph structure is actually quite helpful, and then you can move beyond it. But if that's the assignment and they're sticking only to 5-paragraph structure, then a B plus sounds like too high of a grade. All right, down to a B now. A B for most students is a good grade. A B in a college class on a big writing assignment should be a good, that's a good score on a good project. All right. It's not excellent. It's not approaching perfect, but a B is quality. That's good. However, for them, a B says that the essay has some more substantial weaknesses, such as the thesis being more descriptive than arguable. Again, if it has a thesis problem and you've specifically told students, I want this type of thesis, and they didn't do that, a B is simply too high of a score. The essay frequently uses weak evidence. Okay, that goes to your argument. That's a problem. The analysis is superficial. Again, if it's superficial, why are you giving it such a high score? A B is a good score. Superficial analysis, especially at Harvard, we can't have that. That's a C at best for me. The essay has several problems with structure. Some paragraphs bury the lead claims or are unfocused, or the sequence of paragraphs is occasionally not logical. Okay, so this isn't even close to a B. If the sequence of paragraphs doesn't make any sense, that means the reader is confused. That's the number one flaw in an essay. You cannot confuse your reader. Your reader cannot go, wait, what is this about again? What was the argument? How are they proving it? Why is this explained before that? Shouldn't this go? If it's out of order and it's not logical, that is nowhere near a B paper. Bury their lead claims, which means they probably don't have a topic sentence. That's, I'm assuming, what they mean by lead claim. Yeah, if you can't tell what each paragraph is about, and they might be out of order, and you can still get a B, that's way, way too easy, especially at a place like Harvard. So lots of problems as we go down the list from A down to A minus, B plus, down to B. They're way off track here. Now B minus. The essay is lacking significant necessary elements of argument. For example, it has no thesis. No thesis. And you can still get a B minus. You can get an 80 on a paper, but you don't have any idea what the paper's about from the thesis standpoint. That's way too high. Again, in my classes, that's grounds for failing the paper. At best, if you still write an immaculate paper, but you don't have that, maybe you're at a D, because the thesis informs everything that follows. So if it doesn't have that, then what's the rest of the paper even about? It only summarizes or describes evidence, so it's not interacting from an argument standpoint on this person said this, but they're wrong because this. It's just saying, here's what people say, but it doesn't incorporate the argument. That's a big problem. Does not offer analysis or offers consistently superficial analysis. Again, you're just sort of staying, you're just reporting something. You're not making an argument. Has numerous paragraphs that are bearing their lead claims or are unfocused. Again, if that's just like the last section. If the majority of your paragraphs are unclear and they're confusing to follow because we don't know what each section's about, that can't be a B minus. Lastly, it just uses basic structure and uses no discernible logic. No discernible logic. That means the paper doesn't make sense from a flow standpoint. Beginning to middle and end is all out of whack, and you're still giving that a B minus. That's crazy, okay? A paragraph that has no discernible logic, you can't tell why they went from point to point, paragraph to paragraph in their argument. Again, that's a D paper at best for me. A C grade. A C grade means that the essay fails to address or complete the assignment in numerous ways. Fails to complete the assignment, and you can still get a C. Okay, interesting. For example, has no thesis, again, engages in no real work with evidence, might not use the sources at all. Okay, so if you say in this research paper you have to use 5 sources, and it doesn't even include sources, and the student can still get a C, which means average. It means, this is kind of in the middle. It does some good things and some bad things. It completely avoided something that was probably part of your requirement. Doesn't use sources at all, and you can still get a C? Well, that's not a research paper anymore. So, it might not even be an argumentative paper anymore. Discusses the topic, but does not engage with actual argument. Exactly. What is the assignment you're doing then? This has happened. I've graded so many papers and had so many students over the years that this would often happen where it's like, you're just talking about a topic. Either you're not talking about the topic we assigned in class, or you're just describing the topic. You're not arguing with it. Well, if you're not doing that, then you haven't done the assignment. If you haven't done the assignment, that's a fail. It's not a C. Lacks a sense of completion. It begins exploring an idea or question that never gets resolved. All right, so if it's incomplete, how's it getting a passing grade, much less a C grade? A C is pretty high still, all considering. And yet this person, a student could possibly not engage in argument, not use sources, not actually complete their thoughts, doesn't have a thesis, and is significantly under the expected page requirement. So if you say, well, this is a 7-page paper and you only handed in 4 pages, how in the world is that a C? That's an F all day long. So this is not good. This is really, really bad. Lastly, a D grade is severely truncated, just a few paragraphs. The student may have tried to begin an essay but was unable to complete even a partial argument. Okay, so how is this a passing paper? You can get a D for just submitting anything, sounds like. Just hand in something and you can pass. I mean, that's pretty crazy. So this is where we're at Harvard, sounds like, according to this anyway. Oh, they never give Fs. I guess if you didn't turn in anything at all, you would get a 0 or an F on that score, I guess. But according to this, if you hand in anything, just jot down a couple paragraphs. Doesn't have to have a thesis, doesn't have to make any sense, doesn't have to be in any order, doesn't actually have to argue anything. Just write a couple paragraphs and you can pass. So kind of, again, talking about what we referenced last week, how does any of this mean anything? Because that kid with a D or even the C level, that kid's going to graduate from Harvard. They're going to get a diploma with their name on it that says Harvard. But they didn't do any of the work properly. So are they even that smart? So then an employer comes along and goes, oh, wow, you have a diploma from Harvard. And yet, according to what the rubric has set out, those students haven't done any of the work, and there's no clear indication of how intelligent, or hardworking for that matter, that kid even is. So now the employer is completely misled because they go, oh, well, Harvard, that must be good, so let's hire them. Well, there's no evidence of them actually being good, other than they have a piece of paper where that says Harvard on it. So it's completely phony. There's no real correlation between the academic reputation of the school and the students that are coming out of that school from a skill development or knowledge development standpoint. There's no connection anymore because you're allowing things, in this case writing. I don't know what the other fields are doing in their test and assessment procedures, but from a writing standpoint, this is complete disconnect. You cannot say that you are a competent Harvard graduate when you haven't done these basic things. But according to the rubric, you can be. That's insane. This should not be happening. So this is, again, I doubt this is happening just at Harvard. I've taught at several different schools, and they were kind of similar to this, where the rubric was just way too easy, that students could get a decent score on a paper and have a slew of grammar mistakes. That, again, like this rubric, a student could have, weak thesis statements, weak arguments, weak integration of sources, no structure, all that, and still get passing scores. So other schools are doing the same thing. And so we're left with the argument that's been going around is, well, what does college even mean then? Because if you're not doing the work that's described, that it's not described in the rubric, that's supposed to be there when we say you went to a university, but then the assessments, the rubrics, don't actually assess that, well, then what does it all mean? It doesn't mean anything. It's just a piece of paper. You paid $100,000 to get a piece of paper. That might have worked in the past, but now employers especially are starting to wake up and go, that piece of paper doesn't mean anything anymore. I don't care if it says Harvard on it. It's nonsense, because I know, based on all the rubrics from your teachers, you actually haven't done anything. And so this goes to what the students, I think, talked about in my last episode on this whole dilemma, which is I think there's an attitude, and it carries over to the teachers as well, where remember several of the students went, but I worked so hard to get into Harvard. Why are you making it tougher now? Their attitude is, I'm smart enough to be here, therefore now that I'm here, I shouldn't have to do all this. You should give me good grades regardless of whatever I turn in. And the teachers have gone along with it. They're going, well, they got into Harvard, so they must be pretty bright. So I'm just going to give them the grades that are close enough to being accurate and that makes them at least sort of happy so that no one complains too much and people think I'm a nice teacher and I get to keep my salary and all that. That's what's happening. And so this is a distilled version of the bigger problem I talked about last week at the entire university level. If the writing program is any indicator of what's happening across the university, well then yeah, a degree from Harvard does not mean anything anymore. It might mean the kid was bright enough to get into Harvard, but once they're there, they don't actually have to do any work. So then what are employers supposed to think about that? This is why colleges are falling apart. They're too expensive, and the products they're churning out, which is supposed to be qualified, competent, hardworking, knowledgeable students, that's not them. They're not doing that. So, this is my area of expertise. I'm the one who builds rubrics. I'm the one who assesses, who has assessed writing for, many, many, many years. So this irks me in particular. Again, I don't know what the other departments are doing. Sounds like, based on the grading report I covered last week, it's across the whole school. So every department is having their own version of this, whether it's with written essays, whether it's with the tests they give or the projects they assign, whatever it is, they're not grading rigorously enough. And so it's all skewed and it's all meaningless. Nobody knows what you're doing here. You say you're Harvard. This doesn't look like Harvard material to me. What's so funny is only the A level ever even talks about conventions and style and mechanics. None of the others even mention it. So clearly, as it goes, it's like, well, we don't even really care about grammar that much, which is insane to me. So this is this is the more detailed look at this broader problem Harvard was having, and teachers just have to make a choice, and department chairs who implement this stuff have to make a choice and go, what do we stand for here? Do we really stand for a place that has students do writing projects, and if they don't even include a thesis statement and they don't include any evidence or argument, and there's no structure that makes any sense, and they can have 20 grammar errors, that they can still get not only a passing score, but a fairly decent passing score, like a C or even higher potentially? I mean, how can you live with yourself as a teacher, especially at a place like Harvard, and say that anyone should take you seriously, that you have any credibility as a scholar and as a professor, when you let that stuff slide? It just doesn't make any sense. So the teachers have to clamp down and get more serious. And that's what I said in the first episode last week, which was, maybe this is a turning point and maybe Harvard will, it sounds so weird to say, Harvard will actually start taking academics seriously. I mean, who would have thought that Harvard would have to do that? But that's clearly what happens, because they don't take writing seriously. According to that report, they're not taking their other departments seriously either. So maybe this is starting to change. I don't know. We'll find out. The crazy thing is this rubric, the bottom of the rubric says 2021. Now, most universities don't change these things very often, especially when it comes to writing. Like, once you figured it out, like, you kind of just leave it. However, since 2021, there's been the boom in AI. And so AI is going to make this even more messy, obviously, where it's even harder to assess student writing because they're just having the computer do it for them. Almost everyone's doing that. So the writing part needs to be revamped anyway because of that. But it also needs to be revamped from an actual grading perspective. Okay, so they're going to need to figure out, how do I get students to actually do writing and not AI to do it for them? But also, once I can get the students to do their writing, we need to make the designations between the grades and the points even more clear, so that we're pursuing rigor and having high standards and actually seeing if they can do it. I mean, it's insane. A student can get a C on a paper that has no thesis, doesn't engage with evidence, doesn't use sources at all. There's no argument. It isn't complete and is under the expected page requirement. A student can get a C. I mean, that means anybody can graduate from Harvard. That should not be the case. It should be elite. And it's astounding that me, at my little regular universities, I taught at big public universities as well, but it's weird that I, as an average level, teaching average students, I'm more challenging than Harvard. I expect more out of my students than Harvard does out of its students. So that's kind of an interesting thing to think about, where, I would put my very best students and their writing that I've had over the years up against Harvard students, because in my class, they at least proved they could write. So bring me your Harvard student. I don't care who they are. I'll put my very best ones who actually earned high A's in my class. I'll put them up against them. So this is what employers should be looking for. They should be looking for actual skill demonstration. They should be looking at letters of recommendation from top quality professors, not just, where'd you get your diploma from? Because those are the only markers of actual talent anymore. Harvard is not a marker of talent anymore, clearly. because those students who did, a Harvard student who turned in those kinds of papers in my class would flunk immediately. And yet at Harvard, they get B's and C's at worst. So it's kind of what we said at the beginning of the first episode in this series, which is basically what Harvard is doing is being like, there's A students and then there's everyone else. There's no real differentiation. There's just, you either get an A, and if you don't get an A, okay, you get an A minus, you get a B plus, because none of it really matters anyway. We just need those two groups. Well, in my classes, I actually differentiate between all these groups. And what it really differentiates as is, can you mostly do this or can you not? All right. A D in my class would be like a B minus at Harvard. And an F in my class would be basically a C at Harvard. That's the difference. So in my classes, I differentiate, okay, who can do something versus you can't do any of the things I've asked you to do. Those are F students. And then within the D through A's, I have the differentiation showing, okay, you're better at this, you're okay at that, you're very average at this, you're struggling with this, but it's still better than the F students. Those are the distinctions that grades are supposed to have. At Harvard, those distinctions don't mean anything. As long as you turn in something, you pass. That's wild to think about. So this is the state of Harvard and all of education, because again, this is everywhere. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you my rubric if you subscribe to my channel. So for subscribers, you're going to get my rubric that breaks down how I assess writing. It's super easy, and it only focuses on 3 things: grammar, argument, and structure. I call it GAS grading, G-A-S. 3 things. You have to do all 3 things properly, or at least fairly competently, to get a passing score, or to get, once it's a passing score, a higher score. And each of those has a limit where if you're not doing this, that gets a 0, and basically at that point, the paper fails. At best, you can maybe squeak out a D still, but overall, most of the time, that's a failing paper. As I said, at Harvard, mine would have reached the fail level at about a B minus to C level. So that's how much more rigorous my writing is. And so therefore, my students who made it out of my writing program, I would put them up against anybody. So anyone out there, you want to find someone who can write for your company, your nonprofit, whatever organization you have, look into the students who got high A's in my classes. You can trust that they've been taught properly. You can't trust that they've been taught properly at Harvard. How sad is that to say? So if you want to see my rubric and how I grade students, make sure you subscribe, and I'll give it to you for free. Thanks for watching. See you next time.